Your New Testament reading this morning comes from the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 6, verses 25 to 51. Hear now the word of the Lord. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for food that perishes, but for food that endures, for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." Then they said to him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him in whom he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet do not believe. Everything that the Father gives me will come to me, and anyone who comes to me I will never drive away. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day. This is indeed the will of my Father, that all who see the Son and believe in him may have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day." Then the Jews began to complain about him because he said, "I am the bread that came down from heaven." They were saying, "Is not this Jesus, son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, 'I've come down from heaven'?" Jesus answered them, "Do not complain among yourselves. No one can come to me unless drawn by the Father who sent me. And I will raise that person up on the last day. It is written in the prophets, 'They shall all be taught by God.' Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except the one who is from God. He has seen the Father. Very truly, whoever believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever and ever. And the bread that I will give you for the life of the world is my flesh." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God, indeed. There is a very old story. It's not my story, it's one I heard from the guy who heard from the guy. You know, it gets passed around by pastor types all the time. About a man who was a missionary into an area in rural Mexico. And he came to teach the people the good news of Jesus, who would provide for them what they needed and give new life and life abundant. And though this man was fluent in Spanish, he had found himself having a very, very difficult time getting across to these people the joy and the importance and the freedom that is present in the truth that Jesus is el pan de vida, the bread of life, that Jesus is theirs, that Jesus is their bread of life. And over time and discussion with the community, engaging with people, he came to realize that the image they had in their head when he used the Spanish word for bread, pan, was incorrect. To those people who lived in rural Mexico, they knew what bread was. I mean, these weren't ignorant farmers who just had no idea about how the world works. But pan was like, something you eat when you go to the city. It was gringo food. It was something that, when you've got to travel in for supplies once a month, they're selling pan on the side of the road, loaves of wheat bread. Well, the next week, that preacher came up to the pulpit and explained to the people that Jesus was la tortilla de vida, the tortilla of life. See, Jesus wasn't the fancy ritual special thing of life. Jesus was the tortilla of life, the bread of life. And people suddenly understood with this new translation, oh, a tortilla. Oh yeah, I eat tortillas every day, 3 times a day. You're saying that Jesus is my grain staple. Jesus is the source of virtually all my calories. Jesus is the thing that encapsulates everything that I take in to myself. Jesus is what I rely on. Not wheat, but corn. Masa that's made into tortillas. If Jesus is the tortilla de vida rather than the pan de vida, that means a very, very different thing. Jesus in the Gospels often isn't speaking literally. This is especially true in the Gospel of John. Jesus uses a bunch of metaphors, and the king of these metaphors is the I am statement. He does this 7 times in the Gospel of John. So he says, I am the bread of life. I am the true vine. I am the gate for the sheep, and the way, truth, and the life. And I'm the bread of life. And what he means to the people when he shares that I'm the bread of life is not, as the religious leaders begin to debate and argue amongst himself, that Jesus is made of wheat, that he's like I picture the Wichita State University Shocker mascot, or the Pillsbury Doughboy. It's not that he is literally bread, but that the bread that came from heaven, the providence of God, has a name, and its name is Jesus. So at this time when we are back to basics, we as a community find ourselves forced to think again about the most essential truths of our lives, the most essential beliefs that we have, and the very basic necessities, the things that we need, the essential services. It's a great time to revisit Jesus' statement that he is essential. The bread and the water. That's me, says Jesus. And it's a great time to remember that statement exists within a historical context. The Book of Order has a really great line. It says that the bread that should be served should be common to the culture of the people. When we serve communion, we have wine and we have bread, and we always want that bread to be bread that's familiar to the people who are going to eat the bread. Because the statement about being the bread of life is a statement about Jesus being not special bread, not fancy bread, but daily bread, everyday bread, that bread on which we rely. We've been talking all morning about food and drink and singing songs and reading scriptures about our thirst for God and our hunger for God and our celebration of feasts and those sorts of things, and engaging all around these sorts of ideas. And it's going to have a culmination next week where we're going to get to do something very, very special together. We're going to take the Lord's Supper. And when we take the Lord's Supper, for the first time in the history of College Park Presbyterian Church, and as a unique moment in history for many churches that celebrate communion on the first Sunday of the month, we're going to do it while we the people are gathered virtually. And we've engaged and we've gathered as a session, and we've talked to people about what the best way to do this was. We considered sending you all packets that had like sealed sanitary little cups and bread, so that you would feel like the church had provided it. Or I thought it would be special if we could home make that bread, so we could have the same recipe that Hilda makes that's familiar and bring it to your homes. But I don't think there's a way to do that that's really safe. And I don't want you to worry as you take communion whether or not there could be germs in it, because that's not what we are doing when we take communion. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to speak the words of institution next week. On the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread, and those sorts of things. And I'm going to speak them and have in my mind as I'm praying, and you're going to have in your mind as you're praying, as we lift up our hearts, whatever bread you eat. If that's a tortilla, it's a tortilla. And if it's rice cake, that's fine. And if you like white Wonder Bread or Ora Wheat 7 grain, or if you bake your own bread, we'll remember that that's Christ's body, broken for you. And when you take the cup, I want you to take a cup that you drink from regularly. And we'll speak and bless God for the cup. And you can drink grape juice. You can drink wine. It can be red wine or white wine. It's allowed. I've taken very meaningful communion in the past on a youth group trip with graham crackers and grape soda. It's happened. The word that is used in Greek, it literally means fruit of the vine. So fruit juice. Whatever it is that would be meaningful to you, that is your daily cup. You know, there's some truth to the fact that maybe a more relatable modern equivalent to the wine we use to wash down our food in the first century would be something more like my morning coffee. I'm not necessarily suggesting you go in that direction, but I want you to spend some time this week in prayer, thinking about how you would like to celebrate communion. Talk with God about it. And maybe if you take a weekly shopping trip this coming week, you want to pick out something that you'd like to use. You want to pick out a kind of bread that would be special for you, that you can have when we take communion together next week. You want to make sure that you have something that you're prepared to use as the wine, as the fruit of the vine, so that we, all of us who are gathered here virtually, can celebrate community, which is essential in communion, and can take bread and the cup and the bread of life, can take Jesus into our hearts and into our bodies,
and engage in a new way with him.